This video is the first in the series where we are going to be discussing XML. This video is just going to be talking about XML and what it is and what it relates to without any hands-on examples. The next video we will take a look at a hands-on example of XML via HTML. First of all, a few references here. This is a presentation that I've adapted from Professor Robert Roque and the Lindner College of Business at the University of Cincinnati, using some of his material and a bit of my original material as well. And these are the sources that he used in his presentation. So first of all, a thank you to Professor Roque for allowing me to borrow some of his material. First of all, SGML, Standard Generalized Markup Language, this is the ancestor of the things that we know today as XML, HTML, and XHTML, which we'll take a look at those in just a moment. But essentially, this sets some guidelines for what a universally interchangeable data format is. We typically know it by its ancestors, HTML and XML. These are text-based formats, so we can easily create and edit HTML and XML with a text-based editor. So, given that we know a bit about SGML, let's take a look at a family tree. SGML dates back, it got its start in IBM with just a generalized markup language in the 60s. But it really kind of came to being around 1986 as a set of guidelines for a markup language. Now, if we take a look at this, we see that in 1993, HTML was created as a subset of SGML. HTML is the formatting language, if you will, that we use to make websites. So, around 98, XML was coined, and XML is a more general purpose markup language that's not necessarily used for web presentation, though it can be. XML is used for many other things. Now, you see these both have a common ancestor, and there are a lot of benefits to HTML as there are a lot of benefits to XML. So around 2000, XHTML came out as an HTML format that is XML compliant. So we get a little bit of the best of both worlds, the markup of HTML and the easy parsability and understandability of XML. More recently, HTML5 has come out. Now, this isn't directly a descendant of SGML. It's not 100% SGML compliant. So you see I have it off to the left a little bit here. Okay, so where is XML used? XML is used in many different places. First of all, we have web services, which we're going to talk a bit about this semester. So web services are a way we can get data from different places, and we can aggregate it together by essentially making some remote calls. So both the way we call these services is described in XML, and generally the format of the data coming across is also XML formatted. XML can be used for configuration. For example, server.xml is a configuration file in the Tomcat web server. It can be used for applications like Spring, something called Application Context XML, which we can put into software to make the software easy to configure and easy to extend. And it's also used frequently in integration, like Apache Camel, which is an enterprise integration framework that allows us to pull from something like a queue or a file system, read a message from a queue or file system, transform it, and then deposit the transformed file on another queue or file system or an email. XML is also commonly used in things like presentation. So we'll see XML used in Microsoft Silverlight as well as Android. Android's user interface is typically XML-based. So XML is everywhere. Let's take a look at some examples. First of all, this is a server.xml file from just a generic Tomcat installation. If you're not familiar with Tomcat, don't worry about it, but Tomcat is something that we can use to serve up web pages. And you see here, we're using some XML to configure how Tomcat looks. Now, a web application will typically have a file that describes that web application, and that file, if it's a Java web application, is often called web.xml. So here's a look at a web.xml file. You see, once again, it's text. It's something that we can read. It might be, some symbols and the like, but nonetheless something that we can read. Here's a look at a web service description called WSDL, something we'll take a look at later this semester, Once again, you'll see a familiar pattern of elements and also data within elements. And finally, here is a look at an XML file that's used to draw a screen in Android. So you see, once again, this concept of XML elements and some attributes and some values, text that we can read, and it's going to create a screen something like this. So all of this can be put together with some simple XML. Okay, so XML, one of the things we mentioned is that it can be used for configuration, like configuring an application. Now, why do we want to use XML for configuration? Before we had XML, we would often configure applications like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel with a series of properties files that ended with .ini. But the trick is that these properties files, which essentially were a series of name-value pairs, or in other words, the name of a property equals the value. These properties files didn't have universal rules or validation. So if you went in and you tried to change a property to start Word or Excel, and you mistakenly deleted a character or added a character in the wrong position, your application could stop working, and it would be very hard to find out why it stopped working. When XML came about, it gave us a lot more structure, which meant that we could easily catch if we made a mistake. So we have a concept of DTD, or document type definition, XSD, XML schema definition, or something else called well-formed. These are different ways that we can structure an XML document, ways that we'll get into in a few later presentations this semester. Okay, so XML is everywhere. A good exercise at this point is pause the video, search your hard drive, and look for something with a .xml extension. Open it up, but be careful not to change it. Just open it up and have a look around. You probably have some XML files on your computer that you can take a look at, and you can kind of get the feeling of what's going on inside the XML file. Okay, now, we talked about XML, and we have a bit more to talk about with XML, but first I want to talk a little bit about HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language. HTML is the formatting that we use to describe a web page. In other words, when you go to a website in a browser, the browser is going to download HTML and interpret it. And we will see again some similarities with HTML and XML. And first of all, we'll notice that we have an open and close tag. So you see, this is an H3 tag, which is indicating a relative font size. You see, it's opened right here with a less than and greater than, and then we have some text to which it's going to apply that font, and then it has a less than, and then the slash on an American keyboard, that's the slash on the question mark key. So a slash and then H3 again. That indicates that this is the close tag for this open tag over here. If you want to have a look at HTML, it's very easy to do. You can go into a modern browser like Chrome or Firefox or Edge, go to a website of your choice, hold Control and press U, or simply right-click and say View Source. And under the covers here, you can have a look at the source HTML that is drawing this page. We'll have an exercise in a bit where we will create some HTML, but if you're curious how something works, you see a web page and something that you like in that web page, HTML is a really handy way to kind of jump in there and get some ideas. So it's easy to see on any web page with just a little bit of Control U, easy to take a look at. Okay, so compare and contrast between HTML and XML. First of all, I'm going to start with the very last bullet point here and say good HTML is also good XML. So HTML is very forgiving. It will let you get away with bending the rules sometimes, but it's not a good idea to bend the rules. In other words, let's make an HTML document also a good XML document, and let's follow the rules even if HTML is a bit forgiving. Keep in mind that HTML came out in the 90s and was quickly used by the younger person in the family who is putting together a web page and might not be very computer savvy, but enough to put together a page and doesn't want to get frustrated from making a small mistake. So for that reason, HTML tends to be very forgiving. So first of all, XML is case sensitive, HTML is not case sensitive. In other words, we can use a mix of uppercase and lowercase in HTML, but with XML we want it to all be a consistent case. A good idea, let's use lowercase exclusively in both. That's generally considered proper XHTML. Okay, HTML will often forgive you if you forget to close a tag, such as li, which is line item. So let me show you what some tags look like here in this view source. I'm not sure if I have any line items here, but nonetheless, you can see that we have a drop-down here with the month of January through December. So if I go back to the page, you see the month and you see January through December. So this drop-down is defined by a select element and then a series of option elements. Notice that we have an open and we have a close. Remember, the open is not going to have any slash whatsoever, but the close will start with the slash that's on the question mark key in an American keyboard. In XML, every open tag should have a close. In HTML, should be the same way, but if you forget a close tag, some browsers will be forgiving, depending on what the tag is. Now, one other thing I'll point out, BR is a special case, and there are some special cases like this, where you see the slash at the end of the tag. In that case, this means this is a singleton tag or a self-closing tag. In other words, there is no separate open and close element. It is entirely open and closed within one element. So again, open tag, no slash, close tag, slash at the beginning. A self-closing or singleton tag has a slash at the end. So those are some good practices we want to remember. Okay, so I have those described here. You must close the tag itself. I talked about those, a self-closing tag, and then the begin and the end tag. And by the way, if we have a begin tag, you see this one is called select. The end tag must also be called select. In this case, the begin tag is called option, and the end tag is called close option, as we see here. So these things we'll call elements or we'll call tags. They mean slightly different things, but generally you can use those two words interchangeably. Okay, so in XML, quotation marks are required for properties, or in other words, properties are attributes. So you see here we have an attribute called value, and the value equals 0. We have one here called value equals 1. Value equals 2. So this is an attribute called value. This is the value of the attribute 0, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. So in HTML, we don't have to enclose these values within quotes, but it's a good idea. In XML, we have to put them in quotes. Here again, as a general rule, let's make sure our HTML is also valid XML. Let's go ahead and enclose them in quotes. It's a good practice to do regardless. So that's a little look at HTML versus XML. Now, I have a bit more to go with XML, but I'll tell you what, I think that wraps up the one good conceptual unit. So let me go ahead and stop this video. We'll talk more deeply about XML in our next video, and then the video after that, we'll do an exercise. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.